You ever have that feeling, you're busy all the time, your calendar is packed, but at the end of the day, you wonder what it all really adds up to? It's like we're running faster and faster, but we've kind of lost the map. Well, if you've ever felt that, you're definitely not alone. And today, we're going to dive deep into the philosopher Martin Heidegger's really powerful and honestly pretty unsettling diagnosis of that exact feeling. So let's kick things off with this quote from Friedrich Nietzsche. And get this, he wrote it way back in 1882. It's just chilling how perfectly it nails our modern world, isn't it? This idea of being constantly agitated, this frantic energy that's really just masking a deep inner cold. This feeling, well, it has a name, and it's at the absolute heart of what we're talking about today: nihilism. So, what is nihilism exactly? Put simply, it's a state where the highest values just lose their value, where nothing feels like it has the authority to really truly demand your commitment. The lines between what's important and what's trivial, what's noble and what's base, they all start to blur. It's like the entire landscape of meaning has been flattened out, leaving us with no mountains to climb and no real sense of direction. Okay, so why do we feel this way? This is where Heidegger comes in with an answer that is a total curveball. Seriously, it goes against almost everything we typically think about meaning and morality. He basically argues that the cure we're all looking for is actually a symptom of the disease itself. I mean, you've heard the usual explanation a million times, right? The problem is we've lost our traditional values. Our moral compass is broken. If we could just get back to the old ways, or maybe invent some shiny new values to believe in, everything would be okay. It sounds like simple common sense. Yeah? Well, for Heidegger, that's completely wrong. He makes this really radical claim. The problem isn't that we've lost our values. The problem is the very idea of values in the first place. The whole notion that meaning is something we can pick and choose or create out of thin air. For Heidegger, that way of thinking is nihilism. It's not the cure, it's the sickness. Okay, let's just quickly trace how this happened. For an ancient philosopher like Plato, the good wasn't some value you picked. It was an objective reality, like the sun. It had authority over you, whether you liked it or not. Then fast forward to the Enlightenment and things shift. Values become these things out there that we have to choose from, almost like from a menu. And then Nietzsche comes along and says, no, we create our own values. We posit them. We just declare them to be true by sheer force of will. But, and this is the huge catch, anything you can posit, you can also unposit. The second meaning becomes your own personal creation, it loses its grip on you. And this brings us right to Heidegger's brutal conclusion: no one dies for mere values. Just think about that for a second. A value that you simply chose for yourself is basically a preference. It just doesn't have the power to demand the ultimate sacrifice, because deep down, you know you're the one who invented it, and you can just as easily uninvent it tomorrow. So if real meaning doesn't come from these explicit values, where does it come from? Well, Heidegger points to something much deeper, what he calls knowing how. This isn't knowing that, like learning a rule from a book. This is the embodied, unspoken stuff we just absorb from our culture. Think about it. You know the right distance to stand from someone when you're talking to them. You didn't learn a rule, you just feel it. It's this whole collection of shared, unspoken understandings that creates the cultural soil where genuine meaning can actually take root. But, okay, where does that cultural soil, that shared knowing how, even come from? How does a whole society get on the same page about what matters? For Heidegger, the answer is kind of surprising. It comes from what he calls a work of art. And trust me, his definition is way bigger than a painting hanging in a museum. So a work of art in Heidegger's world is basically a cultural game changer. It's some central thing. It could be a building, a sacred text, maybe a political event that grabs all the scattered beliefs and practices of a people and focuses them like a lens. In doing that, it literally creates a shared world where things suddenly make sense and our actions have real weight. And these examples just make it crystal clear. For the ancient Greeks, a temple wasn't just a nice building. It organized their entire reality. It created a world where things like destiny, heroes, and victory were intensely real and powerful. Same thing with the medieval cathedral. It established a world structured around salvation and damnation, making the roles of saint and sinner profoundly meaningful. In these worlds, you knew where you stood. Heidegger has this really beautiful metaphor for this. He says these great works of art create a clearing. Imagine a dense, dark forest. The artwork cuts open a space, a clearing in the middle of it all, where things can finally show up and be seen for what they are: important or trivial, right or wrong, noble or base. This shared background is what gives our individual lives meaning. So that, of course, brings us to today. If the Greeks had the temple and the Middle Ages had the cathedral, what's the paradigm that creates our clearing? What is our work of art? For Heidegger, the answer is crystal clear, and it's all around us. It's technology. And let's be clear, he's not just talking about your smartphone. He's talking about the essence of technology, a fundamental way of seeing the world, which he calls the standing reserve. It's a mindset where everything, and I mean everything, shows up as just a resource, a raw material to be unlocked, optimized, stored, and held on call for some other purpose. The whole world becomes a giant stockpile. His classic example of the hydroelectric plant on the Rhine River really drives this home. The river stops being a river, in the way a poet would see it. It becomes a supplier of hydraulic pressure. It's just one component in a giant system for energy distribution. It's been captured, ordered, and now it just stands by, on reserve, waiting for the next order. And this quote from Hale 9000 in 2001 A Space Odyssey just captures the logic of this perfectly. The ultimate goal isn't happiness, it isn't justice, it isn't beauty. The ultimate goal is simply maximum efficiency, optimal performance for its own sake. Enhancing potential becomes the only point of the whole exercise. And here is the absolute crucial twist. In this world of the standing reserve, we are not the masters of technology. The line gets blurry. We ourselves become the most important raw material of all, a human resource to be managed, to be optimized, just like that river. We get pulled into this vast, self-perpetuating system that in the end, nobody really controls. Okay, so this sounds incredibly bleak, I know, but Heidegger doesn't just leave us in despair. He does see a possible path forward, but it's a hope that is tied up with a very great danger. So how are we supposed to respond to this all-consuming technological worldview? Here's where Heidegger drops his most terrifying, paradoxical idea. He says the greatest danger is not that technology will fail and blow us all up. The greatest danger is that it will succeed perfectly, that will finally create a totally managed, perfectly comfortable, and maximally efficient world, and in the process, we will completely forget that there was ever any other way to think about what it means to be human. That, for Heidegger, is the ultimate nihilism. So what do? Heidegger proposes a stance that he calls releasement. It's basically a way of saying yes and no to technology at the same time. Yes, we use the devices, they're unavoidable, they're part of our lives, but at the same time, we say no. We refuse to let them define us. We deny them the right to become the only thing that matters, the only way of seeing the world. But releasement isn't the final answer. It's more like a holding pattern. It's a way to keep a little space open, to preserve our humanity while we wait for something new. A new cultural paradigm that can give us a shared sense of meaning again. In his most dramatic language, Heidegger called this waiting for a new God. And this is where that hope becomes incredibly dangerous. Because what happens when you're desperately waiting for a new God to come and save you from a crisis? You can become really vulnerable to some very, very dark forces. Heidegger's own life is the ultimate cautionary tale here. His search for a way out of nihilism led him to make a catastrophic political mistake, his initial support for Nazism. For a time, he hoped it would be this great renewing force. He later recognized his error, seeing it as the most brutal and extreme version of the very technological thinking he was critiquing, the total mobilization of an entire people as a resource. His failure serves as a permanent warning label on his own philosophy. And all of this leaves us with a final, really difficult question to chew on. Heidegger warns that a world of perfect comfort, perfect optimization, and perfect efficiency is the ultimate trap, the final form of meaninglessness. So, if he's right about that, what should we be striving for instead? In our technological age, what does a truly meaningful life even look like?